Hello! In this video, I'm going to give away the first hour of my Souls-like Melee Combat System course. By the end of this video, you'll have learnt many different things, like how to create a dynamic stamina system. You'll get an introduction to gameplay tags and how they work. You'll have learnt how to set up a dynamic equipping and unequipping weapon system. If you'd like to learn how to create a full Souls-like combat system with even more features like backstab and riposte, check out the full course below. And you can also check out the bundle, which will teach you how to make a Souls-like combat system and an inventory system, and we'll go over how to combine them together. With that said, let's get into the video. Hello! To get started, I'm in the Unreal project browser, and we're going to be creating our game from the third person template. So when you create your project, just go over to games and select third person. Then for the project name, just give this an appropriate name. So I'm just going to call this my combat framework. Then we can click create, and this will load up our project. Now, when working with Unreal Engine, I normally like to have my content drawer permanently here. That way I can easily access all of the different files in my project. So to make sure that this is always here, we can just select dock in layout, then just click somewhere else, and then this will make it so we have the content browser always here. Now, when we create our combat system, we're going to need a bunch of different animations and models. To save some time, we're going to import some of those models and animations now. So inside of our content folder, if we just right click and create a new folder and just call this Combat Framework, then head inside here, and then somewhere in this lecture or the lecture before that, there should be some assets which you can download. Make sure to just download them. Hello! In this video, we're going to create a stamina system. So in our combat system, the player character is going to need stamina to perform certain actions like sprinting, rolling, attacking, and so on. So to get started creating this system, if we just go over to our combat framework folder, right click and create a new folder, and just call this blueprints. Then head inside here, right click again and create another new folder, and just call this components. Then double click and open this up. Then just right click and go blueprint class and select an actor component. So an actor component is basically a reusable component that can be added to any actor, as it says here, and we're just going to add this to our player character. The reason we're making it a component is so that we make things a bit more cleanly, and it's just easy to move this logic to another character if we wanted to do that. So if we just select actor component and just call this BP stats, we're going to store all of the different player character stats inside of this component. So if we just double click and open it up, and just create a new variable, and just call this base stamina. Change this to be a float, and then just create another new variable, and just call this max stamina. Then create another new variable, and just call this stamina regenerate. Then just compile this, and let's make it so the player character has a base stamina of 100. And they'll also have a max stamina of 100. So the base stamina will be the amount of stamina that the player character starts the game off with. And then the stamina regenerate, let's make this 0.2. So this will be how fast my player character recovers their stamina. Now when our player character performs certain actions like sprinting, rolling, or attacking, we need to first check that the player character has enough stamina to perform these actions. So to do that, we're going to create a new function. So if we just create a new function, and just call this check player has enough stamina. And we just want to add an input and just call this stamina cost. And just change this to be a float. Now when we call this function, we're first going to drag in our stamina, and we want to check to see that this is greater than or equal to the stamina cost. And then we just want to drag off here and look for return node, and we just want to return whether this was true or false. And depending on that, we'll allow the player character to perform their action. For this function, just make it pure. If we just compile this and I go over to the event graph, if you don't know what a pure function is, if I just drag it in, it's just going to give me the end result. If this wasn't a pure function, so if I just uncheck this and I go back to my event graph, I need to connect an input node, but we are just concerned with the end result, so we can just make this a pure function. Okay, I'm just going to delete this, compile everything, and then close this. And let's go over to our third person character. Next, if we just go over to the components and go add, and look for the BP underscore stats, and we can see the stamina variables that we made. We can change the values of them here if we want to. Next, let's make it so our player character can sprint, and when they sprint, it's going to drain their stamina. And if they don't have enough stamina, we'll make it so the player character can't sprint. So to do this, I'm just going to close this. And then if we go over to the input folder, and we just want to go to actions, and we're going to create a new input action for when the player character is sprinting. So if we just right click and go over to input and select input action, and just call this input action underscore sprint. Then we just want to go to the input mapping context default. This is where all of the different controls for our game are. And we just want to add a new mapping and just select the input action sprint. And I want to make it so the player has to press the left shift button in order to sprint. Here's a quick shortcut. Instead of manually selecting the key, what you can do is just select this icon, then select the button that you want the player character to press in order to perform this action. So in this case, it's left shift, and it will automatically assign the key to the button you press on your keyboard. Okay, next, just save this and go back to our third person character. Then in some free space, let's just right click and look for the sprint input action. And when our player character wants to sprint, we're first going to check to see that they have enough stamina. So let's drag in our BP stats. Then we can just drag off here and look for the check, player has enough stamina. And let's make it so the player character needs at least 5 stamina in order to start sprinting. So here I'll type in 5. We also want to check to see that the player character is actually moving before they start sprinting. So let's create another function. Call it isPlayerMoving. And to check this, we're going to drag in the player character's character movement. And we just want to drag off here and look for get last input vector. And we want to check to see that this is not equal to 0. So if we just drag off here and look for not equal, and then for the error tolerance, make this have a value of 0.001. And then we just want to drag off here and look for the return node and just connect this into here. And this will let us know if our player character is moving or not. We also want to make sure that this is a pure function, so just make sure this is selected. Then if we go over to our event graph, we want to check to see that the player character has enough stamina, and so we look for the end boolean. We also want to check to see that the player character is moving, so just drag this in and connect this into here. If both of these conditions are true, then we'll allow our player character to start sprinting. So if I just drag off here and look for branch and connect from triggered into here. Then I just want to drag in the character movement, drag off here and look for set max walk speed, connect from true into here, and let's just right click and permit this to a variable and just call this sprinting speed. And let's just go compile and let's make it so the player character's sprinting speed is something like 750. When the player character is sprinting, we also want to decrease the amount of stamina that they have because they're sprinting. So if we just go back to our BP stats, let's create a new function and just call this decrease stamina. And when we call this function, we just want to get the stamina that the player character has, drag off here and look for minus, or you can look for subtract and just connect from here into here, select here and just call this stamina cost. And then we just want to drag in the base stamina and set it and connect from here into here and then connect from here into here. We can then just compile this, and if I go back to my third person character, we want to drag in the BP stats, drag off here, and we can call the decrease stamina. And let's make it so it costs 4 stamina every time we're running. Okay, if these conditions are either not true, then we want the player character to go back to their normal walking speed. So I'm just going to copy these nodes, paste them, and connect from false into here. If I select the character movement and look for speed, we can see the player character's default walk speed is 500. So I'm just going to delete this, right click and permit this to a variable, and just call this normal speed. Compile this, and let's make it so this is 500. And then one more thing, we just want to expand this. When the player lets go of the shift button, it's going to fire off this completed node. And when that happens, we also want to make it so the player character goes back to their normal walk speed. Next, for debugging purposes, just so that we can see the amount of stamina that the player character has, I'm just going to right click and look for event tick. And event tick, I'm just going to get my stats component and get the base stamina that the player character has. Drag off here and look for print string and connect from here into here. And then we also just want to connect from here into the string, not the duration. So just break the link there. Then go compile, close this, and let's go play. So right now we can see my stamina is 100. If I hold shift and I move, we can see, okay, it drained my stamina very quickly. So let's just go back to our third person character and let's make the stamina cost something like 0.1. And let's test that out. So if I go play, we can see when I hold shift, I'm running quite fast. When I let go, I get back to my normal speed. Nice. So with this, we've created a basic stamina system. We need to add some more functionality to it, but I think we've done enough for this lecture. So that's all for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello. In this video, we're going to make it so the player character can actually regenerate their stamina. Because right now, if the player character sprints and uses some of their stamina, it never regenerates. So, to create this system, if we go back to our blueprint stats component, and just create a new function, and just call this regenerate stamina. When we regenerate the player character stamina, we want to get their stamina. So if I just drag in the stamina and get it. Also, whilst we're dragging in variables, to save time, if you want to get a variable, just hold Control on your keyboard and drag in that variable, and it'll automatically get it. And if you want to set a variable, hold Alt on your keyboard and drag it in, and it'll automatically set it. So that can save you a bit of time when you're dragging in variables. Okay, so we want to get the player character's base stamina, and then add this to whatever our stamina regeneration rate is. So we can just get this. Then we want to tell Unreal Engine that this is our new stamina. So if we just drag in the base stamina and set it, and connect from here into here. So when we regenerate our player character stamina, we want this to happen every couple of seconds. In order to determine how frequently this happens, if we just go back to our event graph, find some free space, and just right click and look for add custom event, and just call this refresh stamina. Go over to input and add an input, and just call this start stamina regeneration. And change this to be a boolean. Drag off here and look for branch. When we call this custom event, if this is true, then we just want to drag off here and look for set timer by function name. For the function that we want to run, we can just select the regenerate stamina. So just get what it's called. If you press F2, it will allow you to quickly rename it. Just press Ctrl C on your keyboard and then just paste it in here. Make sure it's spelled exactly the same, otherwise it won't run this function. And I want this to run every 0.1 seconds. So if we just type in 0.1 here, and then just check this looping box, and when we call this regenerate stamina, it's going to run this every 0.1 seconds. If we ever want to stop this function from running, we can just drag off false and look for clear timer by function name. And for the function name, we can just copy this and paste this into here. If we just go back to our regenerate stamina, if the player character stamina is ever greater than or equal to the max stamina, so if I just drag this in, drag off here and have a branch. Just make sure to compile this. Then if this is true, we can drag off here and look for the refresh stamina and make sure that this is unchecked, and then this will stop our refresh stamina event from running. Nice. Now we've created some blueprints for our stamina regeneration system. Next, I need to tell you about the gate node, because we're also going to use this in our stamina regeneration system. For this next part, you don't need to copy, because I'm just going to explain what I'm doing. So if I just go over to my third person character, we're going to use a gate node. So if I just right click and look for gate, this is the gate node, and it has a couple of pins: enter, open, close, toggle, and exit. So the way it will work is if this gate is open, if I pass a node through the enter, then it's going to exit. We can make it so the gate starts off closed, and if it starts off closed, first I need to open the gate, then I'll be able to pass some nodes into it. We can close the gate, and that'll make it so the gate is closed, and then it will no longer be able to receive any inputs. And then we also have this toggle, which will toggle whether the gate is open or closed. Okay, just to showcase what I mean, if we go over to event tick, let's remove the nodes here. So if I just press Alt, that'll break the link. And I'm just going to move event tick here, plug this into enter, drag off exit, and I'm just going to make this a print string. If I make this start closed, when I play this, then no print strings are going to flow because the gate is closed. Now, if I just right click and I look for the 1 key, and I'll just connect this into open, and then I'm just going to right click again and look for the 2 key, and I'll connect this into close. If I just compile this, close this, and I go play, I made it so my gate starts off closed. If I play my game and I press the 1 key, it opens up the gate and we can see the print string. But when I press the 2 button, it closes the gate and then the print string starts flowing. So that in a nutshell is how the gate node works. We can just delete all of these nodes now that we know how this works. And if we just go back to our BP stats component, we just want to create a new macro and just call this handle stamina regeneration. A macro is kind of similar to a function. We can reuse this code, although one of the main differences between a function and a macro is that macros can have latency nodes in them. So a latency node is something like a delay node. Inside of a function, we can't have a delay node. So if I just drag off here, and I try and look for delay, I can't have it. Although inside of a macro, if I right click, if I look for delay, I can have a delay node. And inside of this macro, we're going to use a delay node. So that's the reason we're using a macro. So we're going to call this handle stamina regeneration macro whenever we want to basically make the player character start regenerating stamina, or whenever we want the player character to stop regenerating stamina. So I'm going to add some nodes and then I'll explain what I've done. So if we just select the input, I just add an input and just call this execution. Go over to variable type and make sure it's the execution one. Then add another new variable and just call this start refresh stamina. And change this to be a boolean, then add another new variable and just call this duration and change this to be a float. Then just select the output and add a pin, just call this execution. Okay, I can't call it that because I already have something called execution, so just call this output and change this to be an execution. And then we just want to drag off here and look for branch and connect from here into here. So if we call this macro, if we want to make our player character start regenerating their stamina, the first thing we're going to do is have a sequence. And the way this will work is first it will execute this node, then this node. And the first thing we're going to do is get our gate and we want to open it. So just connect from here to here. Then the second thing we're going to do is we just want to drag off here and have a delay. The delay will be whatever this duration is. So for example, if say my player character has done an action which requires stamina, like attacking, we may want the player character to wait a certain amount of time before their stamina starts regenerating. So that's what this delay is here for. We can connect this into enter. And then out of exit, we just want to drag off here and call the refresh stamina. And just make sure that this is checked and connect this into output here. If we call this and we don't want to refresh our player character's stamina, we can just drag off here and call the refresh stamina, although this time make sure it's unchecked. And then we just want to have a sequence. First we will close this gate and then we'll just connect from here into the output, and I'll just double click and add a reroute node. And then I'll just compile this, then go over to our event graph. Now we can't reference macros from components inside of our third person character. So what we're going to do is we're just going to drag in this macro, and then I'm just going to right click and look for add custom event. And I'll just call this my handle stamina regeneration event. And connect from here into here, from here into here, and from here into here. And then just go compile. And now to test this all out, if I go back to my third person character, let's just go back here and let's right click, look for event tick. Event tick, let's always print string how much stamina the player character has. And after the player character has sprinted, we can just drag in our BP stats, drag off here, and call the handle stamina regeneration event, and connect from here into here. We want to make sure that this is checked, and let's make it so the player character has to wait 2 seconds after they have started sprinting for their stamina to start regenerating. Hello, for the sprinting system, we also actually just want to add this node. I'm recording this like in the future, so my project looks a bit different, but we want to add this. I forgot to add this, otherwise it kind of makes it so when we're sprinting, it won't stop the stamina regeneration system. We want to make it so when we start sprinting, it will stop our stamina regenerating system. So make sure it's added like this, and this is unchecked. So now if I go compile, and I close this, if I play my game, we can see I have 100 stamina. If I hold shift, my stamina decreases. If I stop, I wait 2 seconds, and then after 2 seconds, we can see my stamina starts regenerating. And it should regenerate all the way back up to 100, and then once it's at 100, it should stop. So let's just wait. Okay, so once it gets to 100, it stops. Okay, nice. So with this, we've created a stamina regeneration system. Hello! In this video, we're going to make it so the player character can actually see the amount of stamina that they have as a bar on the screen. To get started creating this, if we just go over to our blueprints folder, right click and create a new folder, and just call this widgets. Then head inside here, right click again, and go over to user interface, and select the widget blueprint, select user widget, and just call this widget blueprint underscore stat bar. Open this up, and then go over to the palette and look for a progress bar. Just drag this somewhere into the widget blueprint stat bar, and just select it. Go over here, and make sure it is a variable, and just call this the stat bar. If you go over to progress, this goes from a percent of 0 to 1. And when our player character has max stamina, we want this to be all the way at 1. And when the player character loses their stamina, we want it to decrease, and when the player character's stamina is increasing, we want this to increase. So, to achieve this effect, if we go over to the graph, and we're going to go over to event construct, this will basically fire as soon as our widget is displayed on the screen. And the first thing we want to do is get a reference to the player character stat component. So, to do this, we can just right click and look for get owning player pawn. So we want this one. Then from here, we just want to drag off and look for get component by class. And we can check to see if this has the stats component. We just want to drag off here and then look for the BP underscore stats because our player character will have the stats component. Then from here, we can just right click and promote this to a variable and just call this stats. And just connect from event construct into here. Next, whenever the player character updates one of their stats, like the stamina, we want to keep track of that. So if we just close this, and we just need to go back to our components folder and open up the BP stats, and we're going to use something called an event dispatcher. Don't worry if you don't know how this works. As we create it, you should get a better understanding of how it works. So if I just click here and go add new event dispatcher, and just call this update stat. Just compile this, and I can just drag in this update stat and call it. And whenever I call this event dispatcher, whatever has a reference to this is going to basically call and run this event. So to show you what I mean, if I just go back to my widget blueprint stat bar, I can just drag up here and look for bind to update stat. I can then just drag off this event and look for create event, and then I can just go here and go create matching event and just call this update stat bar. Now if I just go back to my blueprint stat component, whenever I call this event dispatcher, because I've binded it here, it's going to call this event. And whenever we run this event, we're going to update the player character's stat bar. For now, we only have one stat, which is the stamina bar, so we're just going to update that whenever we call this. So if I just go over to my functions, let's create a new function, and just call this update stamina bar. And whenever we update the player character's stamina bar, we just want to drag in the stats, get the amount of stamina that our player character has, and we want to divide this by their max stamina. So if I just drag off here and look for get max stamina, And then we just want to drag in our stats bar, get it, and just drag off here and look for set %, and just connect this into here. And then this will make our stat bar have the correct value and display the right amount. We can just go back to our event graph, and whenever we call the update stat bar, we want to update our stamina bar and just connect from here into here. We can compile this, and we just want to go back to our BP stats. Whenever our player character either decreases their stamina or is regenerating their stamina, we want to call this. So if I just delete this and then go over to the decrease stamina bar, after I decrease my player character stamina, I want to call the update stat. And whenever I regenerate my player character stamina, I want to call the update stat. So we can just drag this in and call it. We can compile this. Next, I want to display this on my player character screen. So in order to do that, we just want to go over to our widgets folder and create another widget. This is going to be the main player characters widget, which will basically show all of the different widgets that we want to in our game. So to create this, if we just right click and go over to user interface, select a widget blueprint and then the user widget, and just call this the widget blueprint underscore player HUD. Open it up, and then go over to the palette and look for a canvas panel. And whilst we're here, if we just go back to the stats bar, we want to make it so we can customize the color of this bar. So if we go over to our graph, event pre-construct, we want to drag in our stats bar, get it, and then just drag off here and look for set color, and we want this one, set fill color and opacity. Connect from event pre-construct into here. So we'll basically run this before our widget is shown on the screen. And we just want to right click and promote this to a variable and make sure it's instance editable and just compile this. And now if I go back to my player HUD, I will drag in my widget blueprint underscore stat bar. Let's expand it a bit. And then let's make it green because I think that's the color of the stamina bar in Dark Souls. And now if I just compile this, close this, and I go back to my third person character, event begin play. So if we go to the top here, I'm going to create a widget. That widget will be the widget blueprint underscore player HUD. And then we will just drag off here and add this to our viewport. Connect from here into here, and from here into here. And now if I go compile, if I close this and I play my game, when I hold shift, we can see my stat bar is decreasing. If I let go, after 2 seconds, we can see the stat bar is recovering. Nice. So with that, we've basically made a widget which will basically display the amount of stamina that my player character has. We can now delete this event tick as we don't need it. And that's all for this video. Hello, in this video, you don't need to copy anything. I just wanted to explain what gameplay tags were, because we're going to be using them in future videos. Okay, so if I just open up my third person character, I'm going to create a new variable and just call it gameplay tag. Gameplay tags are kind of similar to Boolean variables. We can basically check whether certain conditions are true or false, although it's a lot more organized. Because in our game, we're going to need to check things like whether the player character is rolling, attacking, or doing certain actions. We could store these as Boolean variables, although it would get very unorganized. Instead, what we're going to use is a gameplay tag, because a gameplay tag system can basically check a bunch of conditions and we can check whether they're true or false, and it's all organized. Okay, so if I just go over to variable type, I'm going to change this to be a gameplay tag container. So if we just look for this one, gameplay tag container, and this basically can contain a list of all of the different gameplay tags that we have in our game. If I just compile this, I'll show you what a gameplay tag is. We just want to go here, and right now we have no gameplay tags. In order to add one, and so you know what they are, if we just go here and click this little add new gameplay tag button, and here we need to specify a name for our gameplay tag. First, we need to name our gameplay tag. We can see in the example, it's named x.y.z. Just to show you an example of how we create one, I'm going to create a gameplay tag, and I'm just going to call it player.state.attacking. Then for the source, just like default gameplay tag, this is basically where it's stored, and just go add new tag. and you'll see I have a gameplay tag called player.state.attacking. So if I just click this attacking, this will basically mean my player is in a certain state and they're attacking. I can add another gameplay tag. So if I just go here, I'm going to add another tag called player.state.dodging. And then I'll just go add new tag. And as you can see, it's added that dodging. And I can just uncheck everything. And if I just click this dodging, this will mean my player is in a state of dodging. If I want, I can create another gameplay tag. So if I just go player.damaged.burned, and then just go add new tag, I can have a whole state for when my player character is damaged, and I can specify whether that's burn damage. I could add more damage conditions. So if I just go player.damaged.poisoned and add new tag, if my player character is damaged and I want them to be poisoned, I can basically add the tag here. Right now, I'm adding tags quite manually. A quicker way to add tags is if I just go here and then go add subtag, and then as you can see, it will automatically fill it out for me. Maybe I can add player.damaged.blinded and add a new tag. So I have conditions for when my player is damaged. I can have tags for when my player character is in a certain state. And we can check whether these are true or false. So if I just drag in my gameplay tag and just get it, I'm inside a third person character. And I can just right click and look for has tag. And I want this one, has tag. For the tag container, we can just connect from here to here. And then I can check to see whether a certain tag is true. So I can check to see if my player character is poisoned. And then I'm just going to select my gameplay tag. I'm going to clear it, so I'm just going to remove everything. And let me just check this poisoned. And if I just right click and look for event tick, I'll just drag off here and look for print string and just connect this into here. And now if I compile this and I play my game, it's print stringing true because my player character is currently poisoned, because that's what I've set inside my gameplay tag. I can also check to see if my player character is just damaged in general. So if I just uncheck this, because my poisoned is part of the damaged gameplay tag, this will also print string true. So if I just compile this and I go play, you can see it print strings true. If you wanted to specify it so the player character has the exact same gameplay tag, we can click this exact match. So right now, I'm checking to see if the player character is damaged. Although right now in my gameplay tag, my player character is damaged with poison. So this should print string false. So I just compile this and go play. Because it's not the exact tag, it prints strings false. If I change this to be poisoned, and then just go compile and click play, then I'll print string true. So you can just click this exact match if you want the gameplay tag to be exactly the same. So that in a nutshell is how gameplay tags work. Because we're going to be checking quite a lot of conditions, it's going to be easier if we set up the system in the gameplay tag system. And another benefit of using gameplay tags is if I just close this and I just, let's say, create a new blueprint, I can create a new variable, and let me just call this gameplay tag test. I'll give it a variable type, and then I'm just going to look for a gameplay tag container. If I just compile this and go here, I can reference all of the gameplay tags that I made earlier because we basically saved this in our engine files. So if I just close this and go over to edit, then product settings, I can go over to gameplay tags and I can go manage gameplay tags, and I can see all of the different gameplay tags that I've made. And then if you ever wanted to remove a gameplay tag, we can just click here and then go delete tag. That will remove the tag. Okay, and before I can remove this tag, I need to delete its children. Okay, so that in a nutshell is how gameplay tags work. Hopefully you now have a good understanding of what they are, because we're going to be using them in the future. Hello, in this video, we're going to create a state component. As we develop our combat system, our player character may be in many different states like attacking, dodging, and so on, and we're going to keep track of all of this. So to do this, if we just go over to our blueprints folder and over to the components folder, just right click and select blueprint class, then select an actor component and just call this bp_state. Then double click and open this up. Now, when our player character is performing certain states, like dodging, we may want to temporarily disable the player character's movement. To handle this, we're going to create a custom event, which will basically track whether we should make it so the player character should move or not. So if we just right click and look for add custom event, and just call this movement input handler, go over to inputs and add 2 pins. For this first one, make it say duration, and just change this to be a float. And for the second one, just make it say disable input. Next, if we just drag off here and look for a branch, when we call this custom event, if we want to disable the player character's input, to keep track of this, if we just create a new variable and just call it movement input, and when this is true, we can just drag this in and make sure it's set to true. If we call this and this is false, then we want to make it so the player character can move. Although before we do that, if we just drag off duration and look for a retriggable delay. So the way this will work, if I just hover on it, it kind of gives a good explanation. If we basically call this delay again, whilst it's still counting down, it will reset the countdown to the duration. So if I have a retriggable delay, which is say 4 seconds, normally it would wait 4 seconds and then it's going to fire off here. Although if I call this again, then it's going to reset that retriggable delay and I'm going to have to wait another 4 seconds. We can just connect from false into here, and then we just want to drag in the movement input, and this time make sure it's unchecked. Next, to keep track of what state the player character is going to be in, if we just create a new variable and just call this current state, and just change this variable type to be a gameplay tag. Next, because we're going to make more states, and we may want to change the current state that the player character is in, we're going to create a function to do this, because we're going to reuse this later on. So if we just create a new function and just call this set state, go over to inputs and add a new input, and just call this new state. For the variable, change this to be a gameplay tag. And when we call this, we're just going to drag in our current state, and we'll make it so the current state is whatever this new state is. So just connect this into here and this into here. We can compile this. And then we also want to create one more new function and just call this is current state equal to any. Basically, later on, when we create more different actions that the player character can do, for example, if say the player character is attacking with their sword and they're trying to block, we don't want the player character to be able to block because they're attacking. There are going to be times where we're going to want to check to see if the player character is in a current state. And if they are or not, we may want to perform certain actions or not. So we basically just need to create this function. If we just create an input and just call this state to check, make this a gameplay tag container because we want to basically be able to check all of the different states that the player character could be in. And we just want to drag off here and look for has tag. And we're going to check to see if our current state is equal to any of the states that we want to basically check. Make sure that this is an exact match. So just check this. And then we just want to drag off here and look for return node, connect from here to here, and just make this a pure function. Just compile this. And that's all for this video. Now that we've set up this state system, in the next video, we're going to create a dodging system, and we're going to use some of the nodes that we've made here to create our dodging system. Hello! In this video, we're going to make it so our player character can dodge roll in any direction. To get started, if we first open up our third person character, and just go over to the Components tab and go Add, and look for the BP_state that we set up earlier. Just select it and make sure that the movement input is true. Then inside of the event graph, find the movement input section in your player character, and we just want to drag in the BP state, drag off here and get the movement input. We then just want to drag off here and look for the branch node. If the movement input is true, then we'll allow our player character to move. However, if this is false, then we won't allow our player character to move. That's why it's important that we make sure that this is turned on by default. Next, we're going to make it so when the player character presses a certain button on their keyboard, they're going to perform a dodge roll. So in order to do that, if we just close this and go over to the input folder inside of our player character, go over to the actions folder and just right click and go over to input, select input action, and just call this input action underscore role. Then just go over to the input folder and open up the input mapping context. Go over to mapping and add a new mapping. We're just going to select the input action role and just select here and press spacebar on your keyboard. I'm going to make it so the player has to press the spacebar button in order to start rolling. Next, if we just go back to our third person character, the player character also presses the spacebar button to jump. So if we just delete these nodes, then find some free space and just right click and look for the input action underscore role. Click this arrow to expand it. Whenever the player presses the spacebar button, this starter node is also going to fire. And when my player presses this button, we're going to make them roll. Although before my player character starts rolling, we first need to check a couple of things. First, we want to check to see that the player character can actually move. So if we drag in the BP state, drag off here, and just get the movement input, drag off here and look for the end boolean. We also want to check that the player character has enough stamina in order to start rolling. So I just drag in the BP stats, I'll just drag off here and look for has enough stamina. So this one, check player has enough stamina. And let's make it so the player character has to have at least 15 stamina in order to roll. So I'll type in 15 here, connect this into here, and then I'll just have a branch and connect from started into here. Okay, next, if our player character can roll, then we're going to make it so their stamina system stops regenerating. So I'll just drag in the BP stats, drag off here, and look for handle stamina regen event, connect from true into here, and make sure that this is unchecked. This will make it so our stamina stops basically increasing. Next, we want to disable our player character's movement when they're rolling. So I'll just drag in the BP state, drag off here, and look for movement input handler. And we just want to make sure that we disable our player character's input. So just make sure that this is checked. Then connect from here into here. After we do this, we then want to play our character's rolling animation to make them roll. So if we just drag off here and look for play anim montage, and then we need to create an animation montage. This basically allows our player character to perform a specific animation. If we just close this, go over to your characters folder, to the mannequins folder, then to animations, and open up the animation blueprint for the mannequin character. If we just go over to the animation graph, make sure that you have this default slot. This is what allows our player character to perform animation montages. Next, we can just close this. We just want to go over to the combat framework folder, to the animations folder, and then to the common animations folder. Find the rolling animation, just right click on it and go create animation montage. And then one more thing, just open up the original animation, scroll down, and just check this box, enable root motion. This will make it so the animation drives the movement of the character when it's playing. Okay, we can save this and then go back to our third person character. After we do all of this, we'll basically play our rolling animation. And then we also want to tell the game to decrease our player character stamina because they've just rolled. So if I just drag in the BP stats, I'll drag off here and look for decreased stamina. And I'll actually just put this before I play the animation. And let's make it so it costs 15 stamina in order to perform a roll. We can connect from here to here. And then in order to make it so the player character can roll in any direction, we just want to right click and look for get last movement input vector. Then we just want to drag off here and look for rotation from X vector, so this one. Right click here and look for split structure pin. Then just right click and look for set actor rotation. Right click on the rotation and go split structure pin and connect from the Z into the Z here. And then from here into here. And this will basically make it so our player character can roll in the direction of where they're facing. Then we just want to drag in our BP stats and drag off here and look for the handle stamina regen event. Connect from here to here and just check it. And let's make it so the player character has to wait 1.5 seconds after rolling in order for their stamina to start regenerating. So here I'll type in 1.5 and I'm just gonna comment all of these nodes rolling. Okay, so when I roll, I should disable my player character's movement and then move forwards. So let's test this out. If I just go compile and I play my game, I can move around, and when I press spacebar, I roll. It costs a bit of stamina, although I can still move. That shouldn't happen. After I roll, I made it so I disable my player character's movement. So let me just check something. So here in the movement input handle, we tell it to disable our player character's movement. If we just open this up, I actually realized I made a mistake. When we disable our player character's movement, we just want to make sure that this is unchecked. And then we just want to make sure it's checked here. Okay, now if I go compile and I play this, when I roll, because I've disabled my player character's movement, I shouldn't be able to move after I roll. In order to make it so the player character can move again, we're going to use something called an animation notify. At a specific point in our character's rolling animation, we're going to tell the game that we want the player character to be able to move again. So in order to do that, if we just close this, go over to our rolling animation, and just find a point in the animation where you want the player character to be able to move again. So I'm going to make it around frame 32, and just go to the Notify tab, and right click and go Add Notify, select New Notify, and just call this Reset Movement Input. Okay, next, if we just go to your character's animation blueprint, we can also click here, and it'll take us to the character's animation blueprint. Go over to the event graph, and we just want to go here, Event Blueprint Initialize Animation. So when it first loads our animation blueprint, it's going to run these nodes. And we basically want to get a reference to our player character. So if we just right click and look for Get Owning Actor, and then we just want to drag up here and look for Cast to Third Person Character, connect from here into here, and then we just want to right click and promote this to a variable, and we're going to just call this our third person character reference. Okay, next we just want to right click in some free space and look for the Reset Movement Input. So this one, the animation notified that we made earlier. And when we get to this point in our animation, so if I just go here, when we get to this point in our animation, it's going to basically fire off here, and we're going to make it so the player character can move again. So we can just drag in our third person character reference, get it, then we just want to get the state, so I look for the BP state, and then we just want to drag off here and look for the movement input handler, connect from here to here, and we can leave the duration at 0, and just make sure that this is unchecked, and this will make it so the player character can move again. Okay, so now if I compile this, close this, and I go play, after I roll, my player character can move. Nice. There's just one more thing we want to do. When our player character is rolling, we basically want to keep track that our player character is in the rolling state. We're going to reference this information later on. So if I just go over to my components folder, open up the BP state, and just select the current state, go here, and we just want to go here and go add new gameplay tag, and just call this player.state.rolling, and then go over to source and just select default gameplay tag, and then click add new tag. Next, we also want to be able to clear our player character state to nothing when our player character is not in a state anymore. So if we just go over to functions and just call this clear state, and when we call this function, we can just drag in our state and make sure it's set to none. Connect from here into here, compile this, and then if we go over to our event graph, after we make it so the player character can move again, we can just drag in the clear state and just connect it into here. Next, if we just go back to our third person character, after our player character is rolling, we can just drag in our BP state, drag off here and look for the set state, connect from here into here, and from here into here, and then we just want to click here and just check this. So we're going to tell the game that our player character is in the rolling state when they're rolling, and then when we reset our state, we're basically going to clear it. Okay, we can compile this and compile our third person character. And now we've created a dodge rolling system. Nice. One more thing, I may make the stamina regenerate a bit faster. So I think I'll make it, if I just go to my BP stats, I think I'll make the regenerate 0.5. Okay. Hello, in this video, we're going to be creating some blueprints which will later help us set up our equipment system. To get started, if we just go over to the blueprints folder, right click and create a new folder and just call it equipment. Then double click and open it up, right click, go blueprint class, select an actor and just call this the BP_base equipment. So this is going to be the equipment that my player character can wear. We're going to make various types of equipment like swords, shields, and armor that the player character can wear. If we just go over to components, go add, and look for a static mesh. This mesh will basically represent what the equipment is. Let's also go over to variables and create a new variable and just call this equipment mesh. And just go over to variable type and just look for static mesh. And we just want this one, static mesh, object reference. Now with our equipment, the player character is going to be able to equip it. So if we just go over to functions and go add new function and just call this equip item. We'll call this function whenever we want to equip the item to our player character. For now, we're not going to write any code. Next, let's just create another function and just call this attach to player. So with our equipment, some types of equipment like the sword and the armor, we're going to want to attach to specific points on our player character. In order to do that, we're going to reference this function. We can code it now. So when we call the attach to player function, we just want to drag off here and look for the attach actor to component. And we can specify where on our player character that we want to attach our equipment to. If I just close this and I go over to my characters folder, to the mannequins, to the meshes, and let me open up the SK Manny and go over to his skeleton. You don't need to copy this bit. If I just select his pelvis, I can right click and I can go add socket, or just double click and I'll just call this the example socket. And then I'm just going to right click and go add preview asset, and I'm going to look for a sword. And I'll select my ice sword and I can just move it. So we can basically make sockets on our player character and move them around. And then we can basically later on attach specific meshes to these sockets in our player character. We can go back to our BP base equipment and just drag from socket name into this function here. When we basically attach an actor to our player character, for the location rule, we just want to select snap to target, do the same with the rotation and do the same with the scale. This will just make it so it has the same proportions as it has in our socket for our player character. So if we basically make something a certain size in our player character, when we use snap to target, it'll basically make sure it has the same size. Next, we basically need to specify that we want to attach this to our player character. So to do this, we can just right click and look for get owner. We'll make sure that the player character owns the equipment. So that way, when we basically call this node, we can drag off and we can look for class to character. Our third person character is a character blueprint, so it's fine. So this cast will work. We can just right click and go convert to pure cast. That way we don't need to basically connect the nodes. And then from the character, we can drag off and get their mesh and just connect from here into here. Okay, we can compile this. That's all we need to do for now. And if we just go back to our equipment folder, the first type of equipment we're going to set up is going to be a sword. So my player character is going to be able to equip different types of swords and use them. If we just right click on this BP base equipment, we can go create child blueprint class. Now this child blueprint class will inherit all of the functionality of the base equipment. I'm just going to call this my BP_base weapon. We can double click and open this up. And for now, we don't really need to do much, but let's just make it so we can preview a mesh. So if I go over to equipment mesh, I'm going to look for my sword and I'll just select my SM_ice sword so that I can actually see my sword here. If we just go over to the construction script, it'll basically load this before our game has loaded. What we can do is we can just drag in our static mesh, drag off here and look for set static mesh, and we want this one. We can delete this parent construction script and just connect from here into here. So it knows what mesh to display. We can just right click and get the equipment mesh. Because this is a child of the BP base equipment, we can reference all of the variables and functions that we made inside here. And we can just connect from here into here and just go compile. And now if I go to my viewport, you should be able to see the SM_ice sword or whatever mesh you selected. Next, just close this and go over to the components folder. We're going to create a new component that the player character is going to use when they're in combat. This component will also basically store the main weapon that the player character is going to use. If we just right click and go blueprint class, select an actor component, and just call this the BP_combat. So this is our combat component that the player character is going to use when they're basically in combat, and we'll basically use this to store what main weapon that the player character is holding. We just want to go over to variables and add a new variable, and just call this main weapon. Go over to variable type, and we just want to change this to be our BP_base weapon, and just like object reference. And then we just want to create a new function, and just call this set weapon. And we'll basically call this whenever we want to basically set the weapon variable inside of our BP combat component. To do that, if we just create a new input and just call this new weapon, go over to variable type and just look for the BP_base weapon, and we want an object reference. And when we call this function, we can just drag in our main weapon variable and we'll set it to whatever this new weapon is. Just connect from here into here, then just compile this. We also just want to go over to our third person character and just go over to components and go add and give them the BP_combat component that we made. We can compile this. Next, if we just go back to our combat framework folder and we want to go over to the equipment folder, open up the BP base weapon, and we just want to go over to functions, go over to override, and look for the equip item function. So if you remember earlier, we made this equip item function inside of our BP base equipment. Whenever we call this in our base equipment, it will fire here. Although when we basically fire it inside of our BP base weapon, we can control what will happen. So we can just delete this parent reference. And when we call the equip item and we want to basically equip a base weapon blueprint, we will just right click and look for get owner. So we'll get the owner of this blueprint. That'll be the third person character or an enemy. And we can just drag off here and look for get component by class. And we just want to look for the BP_combat component that we just made. And we can just right click and promote this to the variable and just call this combat component reference. Connect from here into here. And from here we can just drag off and look for the set weapon function that we made. And we can just drag off here and look for self. So this will basically tell our combat component that this is the new main weapon. And then we also want to just attach this weapon to our player character. So we can just drag off here and look for the attach to player. And where we'll attach it, inside of our BP base weapon, let's just create two new variables. Call this first one equipped socket. So this will be the socket we attach the weapon to when it's equipped on our player character. Go over to variable type and just change this to be a name. We can right click on this and just duplicate it and just call this one the unequipped socket. When we equip an item, first it'll go to our unequipped socket. We can just get it and connect it into here. We can just compile this. And that's all we're going to do for this video. So now we set up some systems which we're going to use later on in this course. Hello, in this video, we're going to go over how to set up an interaction system. So if my player character finds some equipment in our game, they should be able to go up to it and interact with it. And when that happens, they should be able to put on that equipment. Okay, so let's go over how we're going to set up this system. I'm going to make it so when the player presses a certain button on their keyboard, the player is going to check their surroundings, and if there's an item that they can put on, the player character will put on that item. So to set it up, if we first go over to the third person character folder, go over to the input folder, and go over to actions, we need to just right click and create a new input action for when we want the player character to be able to interact with items. So if I just go over to input, select input action, and I'll just call this my IA_interact. Then if we go over to the input folder, open up the input mapping context. This basically stores all of the different controls in our game. We just want to add a new mapping. We want to select the input action_interact and just select here and press E. I want to make it so when the player presses the E button, they interact with objects. We can close this and just go over to your third person character and open them up. Find some free space and just right click and look for the input action_interact that we just made. and we want this one. Just click this arrow. When the player presses the E button, this starter node is going to fire. And when that happens, we just want to drag up here and do a sphere trace for objects. So we want this one at the bottom. Just select it. Now where the sphere trace is going to start, we can just right click and look for get actor location. And just connect this into the start and end. And for the radius, just make this 50. And for the object type, just drag off here and look for make array. And for now, just like world static, and then change the draw debug to be for duration. That way we can see this debug. And now if I compile this and I go play, when I press E, it should do a sphere trace. So we can see that red sphere trace. And if I go near an object which has the world static collision and press E, okay, so that one doesn't have it, but the wall does. So this wall is a world static. So when I press E and the player character interacts with it, it goes green to just notify that I've hit an object which has the world static collision. I'm going to make my radius a bit bigger, so let's make it 100. And next, let's make an object that the player character can basically pick up. So if we just close this, go over to our blueprints folder, just right click and select a blueprint class, select actor, and just call this the BP underscore pickup item. Open it up and just go over to components and go add. And let's select a static mesh. I'll select the static mesh and let's just look for a cube. And I'll just select this one, this Schaefer cube. Scroll down, just go over to collision presets, change this to be custom. And we want to change the object type to be world static because that's what we're basically checking for. Next, we want to create a system so this object knows when the player character is interacting with it. And to do that, we can use something called a blueprint interface. This basically allows us to make two blueprints communicate with each other. In order to create a blueprint interface, we can just right click, go over to a blueprint, and just select blueprint interface, and just call this BP underscore interact. And I'm actually just going to right click and create a new folder and just call this interfaces, and just put this in this folder. If we just open up the BP interact interface, add a new function, and just call this interact. And we just want to add an input, and just call this actor. And then go to variables here and look for the actor variable and just select it and select object reference. Then just compile and save it. Then go over to the BP pickup item and go over to class settings, go over to interfaces and just go add and look for the BP underscore interact interface that we just made. Compile this, then go over to the event graph and in some free space, just right click and look for the event interact. So when we call this event interact from this item, it's going to fire this node. And when that happens, we just want to drag off here and look for the print string and just make it say hello. Compile this and then go back to our third person character. When we hit an object with our sphere trace, all the information about the object we hit is going to be inside here. We just want to drag off here and look for break hit result. Then just expand here and we can check to see if the actor that we hit has the interact interface. So we can just drag off hit actor and look for does object implement interface. And we want to check to see that the object we're interacting with has the BP underscore interact interface. So we can just drag off here and look for a branch and connect from here into here. If it does, then we can just drag off this hit actor and call the interact message. So we want this one, interact message, and connect from true into here. And then for the actor, so the object that we're interacting with knows what caused the interaction, we just want to drag off actor and look for self. And then just compile this and we can test this out. We can close it, go over to our blueprint and drag in the BP pickup. And now if I just play my game, go over here and I press E, we can see it print strings hello because I'm interacting with this object. Next, if we just go over to our third person character, we made it so we are checking for world static objects. In case you don't want to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to make a custom object type. So if we just close this, go over to edit, go over to project settings, and then go over to collision. And we can create up to 18 custom collision channels. Just go new object channel, and then in the name, just call this interaction. And under default response, we can leave this at block and just go accept. Then close this, and if we go back to our third person character, Just right click here, and we may need to just go refresh nodes, and then we should be able to see it. And just like interaction, we're only going to do a sphere trace for objects if they are of the interaction type. We can just compile this, and now if I play my game, when I press E, we can see my sphere trace doesn't print string green because this is a world static object. So if we actually just go back to our BP pickup item, select the static mesh, scroll down, and go to object type, and just select interaction. Then go compile, and go play. And now when I go over here and I press E, it prints strings hello to signify that I can interact with that object. Nice. So with that, we've created an interaction system. Hello, in this video, we're going to make it so the player character can pick up the sword equipment item that we made earlier. Before we get started though, if we go over to the characters folder, to the mannequins folder, and over to the meshes folder, then open up the SK Mani, and open up their skeleton, we just want to add two sockets. This first socket is going to be where the sword goes when the player has not got the sword equipped, and the second socket is going to be where the sword goes when the sword is equipped. So if we just select the pelvis, right click, and let's go add socket, and let's just call this the sword unequipped socket, and then just right click and go add preview asset, and let's add one of our swords. So I'm going to add this jade sword, and let's just rotate it and just place it here, and just place the sword on your player character's hip. The reason I'm placing it on my player character's hip is because for my character's equip and unequip animations, my player character picks up the sword from their hip. If you're using a different equip animation, you may want to basically change where your sword unequipped socket is. Next, let's create the sword equip socket. So my player character holds their sword in the right hand. So I'm just going to find my character's right hand, so I can look for the hand R bone. So here it is. I'll just right click and go add socket, double click, and I'll call this the sword use socket. And then in here, let me just look for the sword use socket. Then I'll right click and go add preview asset. And I'm just going to add the jade sword. And I'm just going to position this in my player character's hand. Okay, we can save this. Next, let's just close this. And then go over to our combat framework folder, to the blueprints folder, and to the equipment folder. And just right click on the BP base weapon and go create child blueprint class. And we can just call this our BP underscore jade sword. Double click and open this up. And just select the equipment mesh and just select the SM jade sword. Then for the equipped and unequipped socket, let's get what we call our sockets. So I called the equipped socket sword use. So here for the equipped socket, I'm just going to copy it. Make sure it's spelled exactly the same, otherwise it may not work. Let me find my my unequipped socket is called the sword unequipped. So I'll just copy this and paste it here. Okay, I'll compile and save this. Next, if we go back to our BP pickup item, just create a new variable. So we go here and just call this equipment. Go over to the variable type and then look for the BP underscore base equipment, and we want to select class reference. So make sure you're selecting the base equipment and select class reference. Then just compile this, go over to the construction script, and what we can do is we can just drag in this class, drag off here, and look for class defaults. And we want this one, get class defaults. Now, if I just close this and I go over to my equipment and to the BP base equipment, inside of the BP base equipment, we create this variable called equipment mesh. In my BP pickup item, we can reference the default value of this variable, and we can basically get that to display the correct mesh of the item we want to pick up. So I can just drag in my mesh, drag off here, and look for set static mesh. And we want this one, set static mesh, and just connect from here into here, and from the construction script into here. And then just go compile. Now, if I go over to my event graph, we can delete this. Instead, when my player character interacts with this BP pickup item, if it's the sword, then we're going to basically spawn that weapon inside of my player character's hand. So I can just drag off here and look for spawn actor from class when my player character interacts with this item. The class, we can just drag in our equipment variable, and just connect it into here. The transform, we can just right click and look for get actor transform and just connect from here into here. We just want to expand here, and for the owner, we can just connect from actor into here. And then after we spawn the equipment, we basically want to equip this item onto our player character. So we can just drag off here and call the equip item, and that will automatically equip the item onto our player character. Okay, let's test this out. I'll compile it, close this, and let me just get my BP pickup item. Oh, one more thing with the BP pickup item. We need to basically define the class. Right now we have nothing, but let's also make this instance editable and just compile this, then close it. And now we should be able to see the equipment here. And just like the BP underscore Jade Sword, and we should see the sword model appear. I'll just delete this. Now if I just go play, if I go up to the sword and I press E, we can see I have the sword equipped. Although there are a couple of issues, I can no longer move. And I know exactly why. If we just go over to our equipment, go over to the BP base weapon, go over to the viewport, and just like the static mesh, right now this has collision. We want to make sure that this has no collision. So just select no collision. Actually, we may want to do that in the base equipment as well. So we just go to the viewport, select the static mesh, and make sure that this has no collision. Then just compile this, close this, and now if I go play, when I go over here and I press E, we can see I equip that sword at my hip. Nice. When we pick up an item to equip it, we may also want to basically destroy this because now the player character has picked up the item. So let me just go over to my BP pickup item. After my player character interacts with it, we can just drag off here and look for destroy actor. And now if I just go compile, close this, and I go play, when I go over here and I press E, it destroys that actor, and I now have it equipped. Nice. And then to easily add another sword that the player character can pick up, we can go over to our equipment folder, and we can just right click on this BP base weapon and go create child blueprint class, and let's just call this the BP underscore ice sword. Double click and open this up. And I'm going to make it use the same equipped and the same unequipped sockets. So I can just open up my Jade Sword and I'll just copy this, paste it here. I'll just compile this, close this, and if I want, I can easily just change this to be the Ice Sword. When I play my game, I can equip it, and now I have the Ice Sword. So just like that, we made it so the player character can pick up and equip the different swords in our game. Nice. Hello, so you may have noticed an issue with our system. If I just select the sword and I press Alt and just drag it, if you press Alt while you have an object selected in Unreal Engine and you drag it, that will allow you to quickly create a duplicate of it. And let's just make it so the second sword is the Jade Sword. And now if I play my game, I can go up to the sword and equip it, although I can also go up to this sword and equip it. And that's just wrong. When I pick up another sword, I should drop the current sword that I'm holding. So let's go over how to set that up. If we just go over to our components, if we just open up our BP combat component and just go over to the set weapon function. Before we set our weapon, we should first check to see if the player character already has a weapon set. So if we just drag off here and look for the sequence node. So the way this will work is first it'll go off here, then it'll go off here. We can just right click here and break the link. The first thing we want to check is if the player character already has a weapon. So we can just drag in the main weapon variable and we want to check to see if this is valid. If that is valid, that basically means the player character already has a weapon. So we can just connect from here into here. And if that's the case, then we want to spawn that weapon in front of the player character. That way they can pick it up again if they want to. So we can just drag off this is valid and look for spawn actor from class. The actor we want to spawn is going to be the BP underscore pickup item. So if we look for the BP underscore pickup item, and then when we spawn this item, we also want to specify the class so it knows what item we want to spawn. So if we just click this little browse button, it will take us back to the BP underscore pickup item. And we just want to select the equipment variable and make sure it's exposed on spawn. And just go compile, then go back to our BP combat component. And if you just right click here and then go refresh nodes, we should see the equipment. We should be able to define what it is. In order to get this, we can just drag off our main weapon and look for get class and this will basically get the class of the weapon, and we can just connect this into here. And then in terms of spawning, just go over here and select try to adjust location but always spawn. And for the spawn transform, we can just right click and look for get owner, and then just drag off here and look for get actor transform, and just connect this into here. So first we're basically going to spawn the weapon if the player character is already holding the weapon, and then we're going to destroy the weapon. So if we just drag in the main weapon, get it, and just drag off here and look for destroy actor, and just connect from here into here. So now when the player character picks up a new weapon, if they already have a weapon, then we're basically going to spawn that weapon in front of the player character and then destroy the weapon that the player character currently has. And then after we've done that, we'll tell the game that the new weapon is our main weapon. So we can just connect from here into here. And let's test this out. So if I just compile this, close it, and let me just go play. I can pick up this ice sword, and I have it. And then I can go over here and pick up the other sword. And as you can see, it spawns that weapon, and I have this weapon. And then I can swap them again if I want to. Nice. Right now, our weapons are kind of hovering in the air. In order to make it a bit more cool, if we just open up the BP pickup item, go over to the construction script, and after we set our static mesh, we can just drag in our static mesh again and just drag off here and of course simulate physics. And just check this one, set simulate physics, and just connect from here into here. And also just select the static mesh, scroll down, and make sure that the collision enabled is on collision enabled query and physics. Okay, now I go play. The object should simulate physics instead of hovering in the air, which makes them a bit more cool. Although, as you can see, my player character can kind of push the weapons. You may not want that, so if we just go over to the BP pickup item and just go over to here, go over to pawn and make sure that it overlaps pawn. And now if I compile this and I go play, that'll just make it so the player character overlaps these meshes. That way they can't kick it. Although maybe you want that as a feature. And then whilst we're here, let's also just go back to our third person character and we can just remove this debug because now we know how the pickup system works. Okay, just like that, my player character can pick up different swords, and if they pick up a sword while they already have one, they'll basically swap them. Nice. And then I also noticed when I was swapping weapons, sometimes it kind of blocks the camera. So let's also just go over to our BP pickup item and make it ignore the camera. That way we don't get that little weird issue. Okay, nice. Hello, in this next video, I want to make it so the player character can equip and unequip the different sword weapons we made in our game. Although, before we do that, I want to go over how to create a flexible animation system. Because in our game, later on, we're going to be adding different types of weapons, and those different types of weapons may have different equip and unequip animations. So we need to create a flexible animation system that can handle all of our different animations. In order to do that, if we just go over to our combat framework folder and over to the blueprints folder, just right click and create a new folder and just call this enums and double click and head inside here. We're going to create something called an enumerator. This is like a list. If you don't know what an enum is, don't worry. As we work through it, you should get a better understanding. To create one, we can just right click and go over to blueprint and just select enumeration and just call this e_montage action. Double click and open this up and just add two enumerators. So in our game, our player character is going to be able to perform a bunch of different actions with their weapons. We're going to keep lists of all of the different types of actions that our player character can do here. So the first type of action our player character is going to be able to do with their weapon is equip it. So in this first line, just type in equip, and in the second line, just type in unequip. So our player character is going to be able to equip and unequip all of their different types of weapons. We can save this, and that's all we need to do for now. Next, go back to our blueprints folder, just right click and create a new folder, and just call this structures. Double click and open this up. A structure basically allows us to kind of have a blueprint which can contain many different variables. To create one, just right click and go over to blueprint, select structure, and just call this the s_montage action. Double click and open this up. And for this first one, just call it action. And for the variable type, look for the e_montage action that we just made. Then add another variable and just call this animation. And then go over to variable type and look for the animation montage. Just select it, select an object reference, then go here and change this to be an array. An array can hold multiple variables of the same type. Okay, we can close this. Next, go back to our blueprint folder, right click and create a new folder and just call this data table. Double click and head inside here. Then to create a data table, just right click, go over to miscellaneous and then look for data table and just select this one, data table. Then go here and we're going to look for the s_montage action structure that we made earlier. Select OK, and it's going to create a data table based on that blueprint. And we just want to rename this, so we're going to press F2 and just call this our data table _ sword and shield. So inside of this data table, we're going to store all of the different animations that our player character is going to do when they have the sword and shield weapon. Double click and open this up. And I'm just going to expand it. And we should see two columns, action and animation. So inside of our structure, we had two variables, action and animation. Inside of this data table, we can specify them. Just go add and add two rows. For this first row, just double click and just call it equip. Then for the second row, select the action and make it unequip. And then also just call this row unequip. Make sure it's spelled the same. Then just save this, close this, and go over to our animation folder and over to the common animations. And just find the A draw sword animation and the A sheath sword animation. Right click and go create animation montages. Then we just want to go back to our data table, open it up, and go over to the equip line and just go add element. And then we just want to add the draw sword montage. So when the player character has the sword and shield weapon, when we call the equip action, we're going to make them play this animation. And when we call the unequip action, if we just add a pin here, we're going to call the sheath sword animation. We can save this. And that's all we're going to do for this video because we created quite a lot of different blueprints. Hello! In this video, we're going to make it so the player character will try and pick up their sword if they have the sword equipped to them. So I want to make it so the player has to press the R button on their keyboard in order to try and equip a weapon. So if we just go over to the third person folder, enter the input folder, go over to actions and just right click, go over to input and just select input action and just call this IA_toggle weapon. And then if we just go over to our input folder, open up the input mapping context, let's add a new mapping. That's going to be the input action _toggle weapon. And I want to make it so the player has to press the R button in order to do that. We can save this, close this, and let's go over to our third person character, find some free space, and just right click and look for the input action _toggle weapon. Expand this. So when my player presses the R button, it's going to fire off this key. And when the player character checks to toggle the weapon, the first thing we're going to do is see that the player character actually has a weapon. So if we just drag in the BP combat, and from here we can just drag off and get the main weapon, and we can check to see if this is valid. If we just drag off here and look for is valid, and we want this one with a question mark, and just click from started into here. If our player character has a weapon, then this will be valid, because we set this whenever the player character picks up a weapon. If the player character doesn't have a weapon, then this won't be valid. If the player does have a weapon, we need to check to see if they're already holding the weapon. So to do that, if we just close this, go over to the combat framework folder and to the components folder, open up the BP combat and just create a new variable and just call this combat enabled. Whenever the player character is holding the weapon in their player character's hand, we're going to make sure that this variable is true. We can just compile this, go back to our third person character, and next we just want to drag off the BP combat and let's just check to see if combat is enabled. So if I look for combat enabled, and I just want to drag off here and have a branch and come from invalid into here. So if my player character does not have combat enabled, then we're going to play the equip animation. If my player character does have combat enabled, then we're going to play the unequip animation. In order to do that, we can just compile this, close this, and then go over to our Blueprints folder, over to the equipment folder, and open up the BP base weapon. And just create a new variable, and just call this animation data table. And go over to variable type, and look for data table. And we want this one, data table, and select object reference. Then just compile this. And for the animation data table, just like the data table sword and shield. We'll be able to change this later. Next, just create a new function, and just call this get montage for action. When we want the player character to play a specific animation, we're going to reference this function. Add 2 inputs. For this first one, call it action. And for the variable type, look for the e_montage action enum that we made earlier. Then for the second variable, call it index and make this an integer. When we call this, the first thing we're going to do is just drag off here and look for get data table, and we want this one, get data table row. Now, follow what I'm doing, because for some reason Unreal Engine acts kind of weird if we don't do it like this and it doesn't work. So for the data table, just like the data table _ sword and shield, then just drag off here and look for break as montage action, and then just connect our animation data table, get it, and just connect from here to here. Then just go compile. For some reason, if say I were to just break this, and then connect from here to here, and then go compile, it doesn't work. So you just need to make sure that this is connected to something, and then connect this, and then go compile. Otherwise we get an error and it doesn't work. I don't know why that happens, but that's a way to prevent it from happening. Next, for the row name, because it's going to be whatever our action is called, we can just drag off here and look for enum to string. This will convert this into a string, and then we can just connect from here into here. Next, once we find our row and the animation we want to play, we can just drag off here and look for get a copy, and we can basically specify which animation we want to play from our array. We can do that by getting the index here. So we can just drag off here and look for get index, and we can get this bottom one and just connect from here into here. And then we can just select here and we can just hide the action pin as we don't need it, and it makes it a bit tidier. And then we just want to check that this is an animation, so we can just drag off here and look for is valid, and connect from row found into here. And if we can find the row and we can find an animation to play, then we can just right click and look for return node, and we just want this one, add a return node, and connect from is valid into here. And then we want basically have an animation for our player character to play, so just connect from here into here, and we can compile this. Okay, now with this system, we can specify from our weapon what animation we want the player character to play. We can go back to our third person character, and I can just drag off this main weapon, and I can look for the get montage for action. If this is false, then we want to play our player character's equip animation. For the index, we want this to be 0, because if I just go over to my data table, for our equip and unequip animation, we only have one animation in this array, and we want to play the animation at 0. To play this animation, we can just drag off here and look for the play and montage node, and just connect from here into here. I'll then just copy this, paste it again, although this time it's going to be for unequip. And by default, we start with our combat not enabled. So if I just compile this. Oh, okay, I forgot. I also need to just connect from main weapon into here, so it basically knows what animation to play. Okay, we can compile this. And now if I play my game, if I pick up a weapon, when I press R, we can see I play the equip animation. Nice. And let me just test the reverse. So if I just go here, actually go over to the BB combat, and just make it so the combat enabled is true. Go compile. I know the player character is not holding the weapon in their hand, but if I press E, and now when I press R, it plays the unequip because it thinks that my combat is enabled. Okay, nice. That's all we're going to do for this video. In the next video, we'll make it so the player character can actually hold the sword in their hand when they equip it. Whilst we're here, let's just select all these nodes and just comment them, and just call this toggle combat. And I'm also just going to have show bubble and zoom. Okay, we can compile this, and that's all for this video. Hello! In this video, we're going to make it so when the player character equips a weapon, they'll hold it in their hand, and when they unequip a weapon, they'll put it back on their hip. To get started, go over to the Combat Framework folder, and over to the Blueprints folder, and just right click and create a new folder, and just call this Animation Notifies. So in a nutshell, Animation Notifies allow us to make specific events happen at certain points during our animation. So when our player character is playing their equip animation, we want them to equip their sword, and we're going to do that with an Animation Notify. Okay, so if we head inside this folder, to create an Animation Notify, we can just right click, go over to Blueprint Class, go over here where it says All Classes, and just look for an Animation Notify. And we just want to select this first one, and just go select, and I'll just call this my BP_equip Animation Notify. I'll double click and open this up. We're going to go over to Functions, and go over to Receive Notify. And just to get a better understanding of how this works, if I just close this, and we're going to go over to our Animations folder, go over to the Common Animations, and go over to the Draw Sword montage. And we just want to go to around frame 2. So when your player character is drawing their sword. And at this point in our animation, we're going to call the BP Equip Animation Notify. So if I just right click and go Add Notify, then I can just select this one, BP Equip Animation Notify. And when we get to this point during our animation, if we just go back to our BP Equip Animation Notify, when it receives this notify, it's going to fire off this node. And what we're going to do is just drag off mesh component and get the owner of the mesh, which is playing this animation. So we can just get the owner. Then from here, we can just drag off here and look for get component by class. And we can reference the combat component. So I'll just look for the combat component. And from here, we can get the weapon that the player character is holding. So I can just drag off here and look for get main weapon. And then I can just drag off here and look for attach to player. And I can specify where I want to attach this weapon to my player. We can just connect from here into here. And I want to attach this to my player character's equip socket. So I can just drag off here and look for the equipped socket. And I want this one, get equip socket. And then I can just connect from here into here. I'll just move this so it's a bit tidier. And then we also want to tell on our engine that our combat should be enabled. So we can just drag off here and look for set combat enabled. And just make sure that we check this. And just connect from here into here. And from here into here. And then also just check this return node. And I'll just move everything back so it's a bit tidier. Okay, we can compile this and save it. Close this, and then let's just go back to our Animation Notify, right click on it, and go Duplicate, and just call this the BP Unequip Animation Notify. And when we do this, we can go over to the Receive Notify. This time, instead of attaching it to the Equip socket, we want to drag off here and get the Unequip socket. And then we want to tell our combat component that our combat is not enabled. We can then compile this, close this, and then if we just go back to our components and open up the BB combat, last time I made it so it starts true. We want to make sure that this starts false. Now if I go compile and I close this, and then we just want to go over to our animations, to the common animations, and find the sheath sword animation. And when finding the part in our animation where the player character puts away their sword, so here. And when this happens, we can just go here and go Add Notify. I select the BP Unequip Animation Notify. And now if I save this, close this, and I play my game, if I go over here and press E, I can press R. When I do that, I'll draw my sword. And when I press R again, then I'll sheath my sword. Nice. Okay, so there is one problem with this system though. If I draw my sword, and then let's say I pick up this sword, and then I press R, it kind of breaks my system because it thinks that I have my combat enabled. It's very easy to fix this. If we just go over to our combat framework, over to the blueprints, and over to the equipment, go over to the BP base weapon, and we just want to go over to the equip item function. And we basically call this whenever the player character picks up a weapon. Although we need to basically check to see if the player character already has their combat enabled. Because if they do, then we can just equip the weapon to our player character's equip socket. So I can just drag in my combat component reference, get it, just drag off here, and let's just get the combat enabled. Then just drag off here and look for the select node, and we just want to scroll down and select this one with 3 little arrows, and just connect the return value into here. If combat enabled is false, then we want to equip a weapon to our unequipped socket when we pick it up. Although if it's true, then we just want to drag in our equip socket and just connect this into here. And now if I go compile and I play my game, let's pick up this sword and I can just equip it. And now when I pick up this sword, we can see it starts with it equipped. Nice. There is also another issue. I can move when I'm equipping and unequipping my weapon, and that looks kind of off. If you want, you can make it so the player character can't move when they are equipping or unequipping their weapon. Or maybe you want to be a bit more flexible, and I want to make it so the player character can actually move and equip their weapon. So what we're going to do is blend our player character's animation so it's a bit more nice. So to do this, we can just close this and go over to our common animations folder, go over to the draw sword animation, and we can just go over here where it says slot. And if I just go over to slot manager, it comes with a bunch of slots already predefined for us, although we can easily add new slots if we want to. But I'm going to basically specify this animation to play in the upper body slot. So I go over here, I can go over to slot, and just like upper body, save this, then close this, and do the same with the sheath sword animation. Go over to slot, slot name, and just like upper body, then just save this. Then we just want to go over to our character's animation blueprint. So go over here to AP Mani, go over to the animation graph. And what we can do is we can just right click here and break the link and just drag off here and look for cache. We want this one, new save cache pose, and just call this main states. So this will basically store all of the different animations that our player character is doing here. And what we're going to do is just right click again and look for layered blend per bone. Connect from here into here, and for the base we can just right click and look for our main states, and on this one use cache pose main states and connect this into here, so nothing's really changed. Although in order to basically make it so when we play our sheath sword animation it only plays on the top half of our player character's body, we just want to copy this, paste it again, and then just drag off here and look for default slot, then just select the slot, and we want to select the upper body slot. Then connect from here into here, and then select this layered blend per bone, go over to layer setup, and just scroll down, go here, and go add element, select here, and then for bone name, type in spine underscore 01. If I just go over to my character skeleton, they have a bone called spine underscore 01, and what I'm basically doing here in my animation blueprint is I'm basically saying all of the animations which go through the upper body slot, I want them to play only on top of my spine 01. So it's not going to basically play the animation below my player character's spine 01 bone. Okay, we can compile this. And now if I play my game and I press E, I should be able to run. And when I press R, we can see it only plays the animation on the upper part of my player character's body. Nice. So with that, our player character can equip and unequip different weapons and also pick them up. Nice, we're making good progress. Hello, so there's one more thing I want to do with my equip and unequip system. If my player character picks up a weapon, then presses R, if I continuously spam the R key, then my player character is going to act kind of weird. So in order to basically fix that issue, we're going to reference the state system that we set up earlier. If we go over to our components, go over to BP state, and just like the current state, I want you to add a new state. So if I just go here, I'm going to select here and go add subtag, and add a subtag called player.state.general_action. We can save this, and then go over to your third person character. And we're going to go over to the toggle combat. After we check that the player character has a valid main weapon, we can just drag in our BP state, drag off here and look for set state. And let's make it so the player character is in the general action state. And just connect from here into here, and from here into here. We can then just compile this, and then go over to the equip and unequip animations. And then just find a point in the animation. So I'm going to go here and just go add notify, create a new notify, and just call this clear state. Just copy this, and you want to add the same to the sheath sword animation. So I'll add it at the end here, paste it, then go over to your character's animation blueprint, go over to the event graph, and just right click and look for the clear state animation notify. And then we just want to, when we get to this point in our character's animation notify, we can just get our third person character reference, get the BP state, and then just call the clear state. Because our player character will no longer be equipping or unequipping their sword once they get to that point in our animation, we can just compile this. And now if I go back to my third person character, we actually need to do another check before we decide to equip or unequip our sword. We basically need to check that the player character should not be in a state which prevents them from performing the equip or unequip action. So if we just go over to functions and create a new function and just call this can toggle combat. And when we call this function, we're just going to drag in our BP state, and we just want to drag up here and look for the is state equal to any function that we made earlier. I want to check to see if the player character state is equal to the general action. And we just want to drag up here and look for not boolean. Drag up here and look for the return node, and then just connect from here into here and make this a pure function. Then go over to the event graph and just drag in this can toggle combat, drag up here and have a branch, connect from here into here and from here into here. So if our player character is not in the general action state, we'll basically allow them to equip or unequip their sword. Okay, now that I've compiled my game, if I play my game, if I equip the sword and I press R, I should not be able to spam it. Okay, nice. Because when our player character is equipping or unequipping their sword, they're in the general state, and when the player character is in the general state, we do not allow them to equip or unequip their sword. Okay, nice. So, that's all for this video. If you'd like to learn how to develop this even further, check out the full Souls-like combat system course on my website. It's over 12 hours long and will teach you everything you need to know about creating a Souls-like combat system. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.